The blood-cursed nights. Lily Carter had always been the girl with the quiet demeanor and dark circles under her eyes. She grew up in a small, close-knit town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Her childhood had been relatively normal until she hit puberty. That's when everything changed. It started with her periods. They were heavier than normal, painful beyond belief. Her mother, Rachel, had assured her it was just part of growing up, but Lily had her doubts. By the time she turned 16, Lily's periods had become something to fear. She would wake up at night to find her sheets soaked in blood, the smell metallic and overpowering. She began setting alarms to wake her up every 2 hours so she could change her clothes and bed linens. But the blood was relentless. It poured out of her as if a wound had opened somewhere deep inside. She tried talking to her friends about it, but they dismissed her concerns. "Oh, come on, Lily," her best friend Hannah had said. "All girls have heavy periods. It's just part of life." Lily's mother finally took her to a doctor, who ran a series of tests. They diagnosed her with adenomyosis, a condition where the lining of the uterus grows into the muscle wall, causing heavy, painful bleeding. "It's nothing to worry about," the doctor had said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "There are medications that can help manage the symptoms." Lily was put on birth control pills to regulate her cycle and given painkillers for the cramps, but nothing seemed to help. The blood-cursed nights continued. The shadows that watch. As Lily's condition worsened, so did her mental state. She started seeing things that weren't there. Dark shapes flitted at the edges of her vision, disappearing when she turned to look. She heard whispering at night, faint and unintelligible, like someone was speaking from the shadows. It was the same every month, just before her period began. The whispers grew louder, the shadows darker, and the blood came faster. The first warning. One evening, after another exhausting day at school, Lily decided to go for a walk to clear her mind. As she wandered the familiar streets, she felt drawn to an old, abandoned house at the edge of town. It had been empty for years, its windows boarded up, and its garden overgrown with weeds. The locals called it the Blackwood House, named after the family that once lived there. Despite the eerie appearance, something about the house called to her. Lily stepped closer, peering through a crack in one of the boarded windows. The interior was dark, and she could barely make out the shapes of furniture draped in dust covers. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat, a faint glow, red and pulsing, like the embers of a dying fire, emanating from a back room. Lily felt a sudden, sharp pain in her abdomen, forcing her to double over. The pain was accompanied by a metallic taste in her mouth, as if she had bitten her tongue. She stumbled back from the window, her heart racing. The glowing light seemed to grow brighter, almost as if it were reacting to her presence. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through her bones. It was as if the house itself was alive, sensing her, calling to her. Terrified, Lily turned and ran, the pain in her abdomen intensifying with each step. She didn't stop until she was back at her own front door, gasping for breath. Her hands were shaking as she fumbled with the key, desperate to get inside. That night, Lily dreamed of the Blackwood house. In her dream, the glow filled every room, illuminating walls covered in strange symbols. She saw herself standing in the center of a darkened room, blood pouring from her body, forming patterns on the floor. A voice, low and ancient, echoed in her mind, come to me. The house's secret. The next day, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The pain in her abdomen persisted, and she kept tasting blood. She tried to focus on her classes, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the abandoned house and the strange glow she had seen. During lunch, she searched for information about the Blackwood house on her phone. She found an old news article about the family that had once lived there. They were a prominent family in the 1800s, known for their wealth and influence. But the article hinted at dark rumors, stories of occult practices, and blood rituals performed in secret. The family had vanished without a trace, and the house had been abandoned ever since. Lily felt a chill run down her spine. Her blood condition, the dreams, and now the house, it all seemed connected. She had to know more. After school, she headed to the local library, hoping to find something in the town's historical records. In the dusty archives, she found a journal written by one of the Blackwoods, a woman named Margaret. The entries spoke of a ritual that required the blood of a young woman to summon an ancient entity, a being that promised power and eternal life. Margaret wrote about using her own daughter in the ritual, how she had prepared the house to channel the entity's power. The journal ended abruptly, with Margaret writing about her fear that the entity had turned against them. Lily's hands trembled as she closed the journal. She knew now why she felt drawn to the house. The entity Margaret had summoned was still there, waiting for someone with the right blood to come along. And somehow, it had sensed Lily's presence. The entity's touch. Lily couldn't ignore the signs any longer. She had to confront whatever was happening. That night, she went back to the Blackwood house. Armed with a flashlight and Margaret's journal, she pried open one of the boards covering a window and slipped inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. Lily's footsteps echoed in the empty halls as she made her way to the back room, the one where she had seen the glow. The room was empty, except for an old mirror hanging on the wall, its surface cracked and grimy. As Lily approached, the mirror seemed to ripple, as if it were made of water. Suddenly, the glow appeared again, emanating from the mirror. It grew brighter, and the room was filled with a warm, pulsating light. Lily felt the pain in her abdomen flare up, more intense than ever. She doubled over, gasping, as blood began to pour from her nose, dripping onto the floor. In the mirror, a figure appeared, a woman with long, dark hair and piercing eyes. Lily recognized her from the photograph in the archives. It was Margaret Blackwood. But Margaret's reflection was different from the one in the picture. Her eyes glowed red, and her face was twisted with rage and desperation. "You're mine," the figure in the mirror hissed. "Your blood will free me. Your blood will give me life." The glow intensified, and Lily felt a force pull her toward the mirror. She tried to resist, but her body wouldn't obey. Her reflection shifted, becoming Margaret's, as if they were merging into one. The mirror's surface began to crack, and a high-pitched sound filled the room, like glass shattering. The blood connection. Lily managed to break free from the mirror's pull, stumbling back against the wall. She could feel the entity's presence inside her now, pressing against her mind, trying to take control. The pain in her abdomen was excruciating, as if something were clawing its way out of her. Desperate, she flipped through Margaret's journal, looking for anything that might help. One of the last entries mentioned a protective spell, a way to bind the entity and prevent it from taking over. The spell required blood, of course, Lily's blood, but it also required a symbol drawn with ash and salt, representing the severing of the blood bond. Lily hurried back to her house, grabbing a box of matches and a container of salt from the kitchen. She lit a fire in the fireplace and burned some paper to create ash. Mixing the ash and salt, she used her finger to draw the symbol on the floor, a star within a circle with lines radiating outward. She cut her palm, letting the blood drip onto the symbol. As she did, she felt a shift, as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. The pain in her abdomen lessened, and the presence in her mind grew fainter. The symbol glowed briefly, absorbing the blood, then faded. For the first time in weeks, Lily felt a sense of relief. The entity was still there, but it was weaker, its connection to her severed by the spell. She knew she wasn't free yet, but at least she had bought herself some time. A battle of wills. In the days that followed, Lily prepared herself for a final confrontation with the entity. She spent hours studying Margaret's journal, learning the rituals and spells that could weaken the entity further. She practiced them in secret, using her own blood to strengthen the protective symbols around her room. But the entity wasn't finished with her. It attacked her in her dreams, showing her visions of the Blackwood house, filled with blood and fire. It whispered in her ear, urging her to return to the house, to complete the ritual and free it from its prison. Lily fought back with everything she had. She recited the protective spells, surrounded herself with symbols, and refused to give in to the entity's demands. The more she resisted, the weaker the entity became. But each time she used her blood, she felt herself growing weaker as well. The battle was taking its toll on her body and mind. One night, as she lay in bed, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She opened her eyes to see Margaret standing over her, eyes glowing red in the darkness. "You can't fight me forever," Margaret said, her voice like a hiss. "Your blood is mine. You will come to me." Lily bolted upright, but Margaret was gone. The room was empty, the only sound her own ragged breathing. She knew then that the entity was growing desperate. Its influence was weakening, but it was still strong enough to manifest, to haunt her waking moments. The final confrontation. Lily knew she couldn't keep running. She had to end it, once and for all. She returned to the Blackwood house, armed with everything she had learned. In the back room, the mirror waited, its surface cracked and dark. Lily drew the protective symbol on the floor with ash and salt, then cut her palm again, letting the blood flow onto the symbol. The mirror began to glow, and Margaret's reflection appeared, her face twisted with anger. "You cannot banish me," Margaret hissed. "I am eternal. Your blood will bring me back." Lily began to chant the binding spell, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. The glow from the mirror pulsed, growing brighter with each word. Margaret's face twisted in pain, her image flickering. The ground beneath Lily's feet shook, and the walls of the house groaned. The mirror's surface cracked, and a deafening roar filled the room. Lily pressed on, shouting the final words of the spell. The mirror shattered, shards flying outward, and the glow disappeared. The room fell silent. The pain in Lily's abdomen vanished, and she felt the entity's presence slip away. The house was still, as if it had finally found peace. Moving forward, Lily walked out of the Blackwood house, feeling lighter than she had in months. The entity was gone, its power broken. She knew she would carry the scars of the ordeal forever, both physical and emotional. But for the first time, she felt like she could breathe, like she could live without fear. Back at home, Lily told her mother everything. Rachel listened, her face pale, but she didn't interrupt. When Lily finished, Rachel hugged her tightly. "We'll get through this," she said. Together. The blood-cursed nights were over, but Lily knew she would always be connected to the darkness. She had faced it, and she had survived. And now, she would begin the process of healing.